So today we are going to be solving number line jumps. This is a HackerRank challenge that is quite interesting. I'm going to show you a very easy way to understand this problem. Now it says you are choreographing a circus. Shows a circus show with various animals. For one act, you are given two kangaroos on a number line ready to jump on a positive direction toward infinity. The first kangaroo starts at location x1 and moves at a rate v1 meters per jump. The second kangaroo starts at location x2 and moves at rate v2 meters per jump. You have to figure out a way to get both kangaroos at the same location at the same time as part of the show. If it is possible, return yes, else return no. Now let's go down. Let me just show you what you need to keep in mind. So this constraint says x1 is less than x2, meaning that kangaroo at location x1 is behind the kangaroo at location x2. Let's now understand what is happening. Now there are two ways to solve this problem. One is a brute force way. So you have to calculate the new location. For instance, we have x1 here and we have x2. After one jump, we have the new location will be x1 plus v1, and the new location for x2 will be x2 plus v2. You're now going to check, is this value here equal to this value here? If they are not equal, you continue iterating until they are equal or until until this value becomes bigger than this one. Now that is called the brute force way. We are not going to use a brute force. We are simply going to use a very interesting logic. So let me show you how this logic develops. Now, these two kangaroos are in different locations. X1 is behind X2. The criteria for them to meet is this. The criteria is that X1 must be moving faster than X2. That is one criteria, because if X2 is moving faster than x1, then they can never meet because the distance will simply increase. So the first criteria says the first criteria says that the speed of x1, which is v1, must be greater than the speed of v2. That's number one. Now for each jump, we have a distance. X1 has to cover this distance here, right? He has to cover this distance h here. So this distance h is x2 minus x1, right? This is the distance x1 this guy here has to cover. So for each of this jump, he will cover this distance by a fraction, right? So the fraction of, or the factor with the amount of which he will cover this distance will be the difference in the speed. So once x1 jumps and x2 jumps, the difference will now be the difference in v1 and v2. But since v1 now is this criteria is greater than v2, it means that that will be v1 minus v2. So at the end of one jump, x1 have covered a chunk like this, like here, which is v1 minus v2. So he has to cover several chunks, v1 minus v2, continuously until he gets to exactly the same, until he covers the whole distance. Now it's possible that at some point he can overshoot. So the only way he is not going to overshoot and they are going to be in the same place is that v1 minus v2, okay, must be a factor of h. So v1 minus v2 must be a factor of h, meaning that h over v1 minus v2 divided by must give no remainder. So what it means is the code will look like this. If we have h is equal to x2 minus x1, and we also have that v2, sorry, let me just use this. we also must have that h divided by v1 minus v2 must not give must be equal to 0. That is, it must be a factor. So it has to be must be equal to 0. So once this criteria holds and this other criteria holds, v1 is also greater than v2, then we can say yes, they can meet at some point. So let's go and write it in HackerRank and let's see how it plays out. So the first thing we are going to do, let's go down. So the first thing we are going to do here is to calculate h, which is equal to x2 minus x1, and we now say if, we now put in the criteria here, if v1 must be greater than v2, that's one criteria, and we now say that the difference in velocities must be a factor of the distance to cover, and that will be that if v1, I'm going to put in brackets, v1 minus v2 mod h, sorry, it's actually going to be h mod v1 minus v2 so this is what we have. So if this criteria holds, we'll simply return true. We return, is it yes or no, or true or false? Let's just check. So it's yes and no. So let's see. So return yes, else return no. Yeah, so this is exactly the solution to this problem, and it simply takes a simple logic. Let's now run it. So let's now run it to see if it works. So I'm going to click on run code, and it failed one test case. So let's see. So we have a typo here. So this is going to be if v1 is greater than v2 here. Okay. So let's run it again. So run code, and this time it passes the two test cases, and let's now submit to see what happens. Yeah, so it passed all the test cases, so I want to stop here, and also I want to give you a thumbs up for viewing, and also remember to subscribe to my channel if this has been informative for you. And remember, I'm Kindson the Tech Pro, and I'm always there for you.